Brett, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is your first live interview. You've started your own company since then, but I do, before we talk about the future, want to dive really deeply into the past.
Sure.
You've said a number of times now that you were not aware of a lot of the alleged misconduct that happened at FTX. But how did you not know, and what did you know?
So, like with everyone else, it's been just an unbelievable, devastating realization as to all of the details that have come to light about what's been happening on the FTX.com and Alameda side. And looking through a lot of the details, reading the indictments about what's happened here, it's so clear that there were deliberate steps taken to mislead investors, to mislead internal employees like myself, to hide what was happening from the general public. And that has been sort of the most shocking part of all of this, that this was not something that we could have ever really known, given what steps were taken to hide this from everyone.
You were a really senior executive at FTX across the empire. You were the head of FTX
on the US side, yes.
But should you have known what was going on?
You know, one thing I said, publicly in my statement was how much I and the other senior executives at FTX US had struggled to try to get more information about what was happening, on trying to establish more, protocols internally for separation between the two entities, and to, in general, increase the level of communication between Sam, the other officials, and ourselves. And it was a frustrating thing about being there was like how little we were kept in the loop on many decisions that were happening. Obviously, all of this alleged misconduct, but also things about the day-to-day operation of the company, various deals that took place over the summer, different sort of acquisition targets, different decisions that were made that would affect the U.S. business. We were just, systematically left out of.
Well, be more specific there. You said you were left out of certain deals. Were you involved with things like BlockFi, for example, where honestly, when you look at the bankruptcy filings, a lot of FTT tokens were being used in pursuit of that deal?
That's a good example. That was, for that specific deal, I found out about that because a reporter called me and asked me tell her about the specifics of that deal, and I knew nothing about it. And that was, again, it was sort of embarrassing and frustrating for me to be, supposed to be the president of FTX US, but to not be told at all what this deal was, how it was structured, what the purpose was, and for me to have to ask internally and to get very little answers in response.
You also just mentioned that you felt that you were misled very specifically with certain information that you were not only left out of, but misled upon. What are examples of that?
I think the prime example here is about Alameda. Both the private internal messaging around Alameda as well as the public one was that this was a company that was completely separate. It was walled off from the employees of FTX US, that they didn't have any special access or privileges with respect to the exchange. And of course, what has come to light through reading the SEC, CFTC, and DOJ indictments is that that was completely not the case.
Now, you've spent only 17 months at FTX US, but you've known Sam Bankman-Fried for about a decade, from what I understand. You worked with him back at Jane Street. You were his boss.
I wasn't his boss, but we were in different departments. I was in the technology side. He was in the trading side. In some of my earliest years at the company, I helped develop a program at Jane Street to help teach new traders how to program in our internal programming languages, and he was one of my earliest students. So I met him back in 2013.
So would you have any indication from then to now that he would have been able to lead the FTX empire and that this would have gone this way, even between the relationship between the two of you?
It was really early days then. I never could have fathomed that he would go on to build this gigantic company, and then of course everything that's happened afterwards, or that one day I would go work for him. At the time, he was someone who seemed to have a lot of promise at the company. He was someone who was enjoyable to be around, to work with. He showed a lot of potential. We had common interests in terms of the different charities that we both contributed to.
Were you friends?
I wouldn't say that we were friends, but we were definitely friendly in the office, and we worked together on a few projects. And then we had kept in touch, a couple times a year between the time I left Jane Street and the time that I ended up joining FTX US, and really had only sort of tracked his progress during that time, seen how successful and how exciting FTX would be to join, and that's what really excited me about joining in the first place.
Now, kind of fast forward in that relationship towards the end of your time at FTX, and in a recent tweet thread, you said that your relationship had reached a point of total deterioration after months of disputes. What were those disputes?
They were primarily disputes that I would attribute to the growing pains of any high-growth company. Problems around internal communication, around structuring the company for providing better governance, especially as we were growing larger, around hiring enough developers and other senior staff that we needed to be able to accomplish many of the goals that we were seeking to accomplish. And when I would try to bring up these kinds of criticisms internally at the company, they were never met well. And at some point, we truly weren't really speaking much to each other over the course of the last part of the time that I was there.
Now, you had mentioned these disputes were not just with Sam Bankman-Fried. You had mentioned these disputes were with other members of his staff, his deputies. Who else did you find those disputes with?
Yeah, they were primarily with Sam, but I think many of the people around Sam really agreed with him on most of the internal decisions, especially around trying to kind of grow and separate the staff. There was very much sort of a separation between the group of people who were the executives in the Bahamas, sort of around them, living together, who were making those kinds of decisions, versus the people on the U.S. side who were, as I said, were systematically left out of many of those decisions.
To the extent that you believe, the number of his deputies have already come up and pled guilty to some of the charges that we're seeing against FTX.
Sure.
What do you think about those charges, and do you think that there's anybody else that will be brought into them?
I'm not sure if there's going to be anybody else at this point. I do think that the charges they're damning, and they're truly shocking to see sort of the depths that Sam and his close associates went to try to conceal this fraud from the public and the private. And as a customer of the exchange myself, as someone who had worked extremely hard to try to build out this great business on the U.S. side, who had hired extremely talented individuals into the U.S. company to be able to accomplish those goals, it was really, really sad to see all this come to light. Now,
you had said fraud, but this is still an alleged fraud. He has not been convicted yet, although others have pled guilty. I'm wondering what you think about the go-forward path here. I mean, do you have any evidence? Are you cooperating with authorities at this time?
I can't speak to whether I am or am not, involved in the investigation. I am very happy to cooperate in any way that I can. But at this point, it's really just sort of a wait and see. We're going to see if there are more details that come to light, if there are anyone else that's sort of brought in who ends up pleading guilty or not, whether this case actually ends up making it to trial. It's something that I'm kind of watching and waiting and interested in the way that kind of everyone else is in the public.
Have you been in touch with Sam since you've left?
No. In fact, I think we were last in touch several months before I left the company even.
Have you been in touch with any of his other deputies that you had said you had disputed with? And if you had the opportunity to talk to Sam, would you want to, and what would you say?
No to the first question. And on the second one, I think nothing. I think at this point, it's best for me and for everyone, the media, the public, investors, everyone, to move on from Sam and find a path forward to be able to move forward with crypto in this industry. I think, it's time to turn the page.